Thank you for joining us for the budget presentation of the 21-22 preliminary operating budget. This budget presentation is designed to provide the public an understanding on the funding that the division receives, how this funding is allocated, and the effects of this funding on staffing and other budgetary costs. At the end of this presentation, I'll provide additional information on where you may find other budget reports and information. I'll also provide details on how you may provide feedback to the division on this year's budget. We'll start this presentation with the division's budget process. The budget process starts with getting public feedback to the division's town hall meeting. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the division held a virtual event through an online platform in which over 200 parents, students, staff, and community members virtually attended. The town hall meeting asked for feedback on one main question. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, changes were made to school organizations and instructional delivery. Are there changes that impacted students in a positive way that should continue and be built on? There were 7 main themes that emerged from the discussions and feedback that we received. These include enhanced sense of community, online instruction, online platform for community and parent engagement, school structures, communication, wellness, and health standards in secure schools. The feedback received through these processes were provided to the board and assisted with the establishment of the division's priorities. Through the feedback received in the town hall, the board retained the 3 main priorities of achievement, inclusion, and innovation. Through the budget process, these board priorities guided the division's budget allocations. The feedback also supported in the development of the board budget beliefs that the budget is developed in the best interest of all students, that it is an open and transparent process, to have the staffing to facilitate educational opportunities, that education is the foundation to student success, that the budget must provide equitable access to educational opportunities, to keep school fees as low as possible, and have the opportunity for innovative practices. As part of the budget development, student enrollment is a major factor that determines the funding and related allocations. For the 21-22 school year, it is projected that the division will have an estimated 11,634 students. Although this is an increase of 3.42% from the prior year, it is only a partial recovery on student enrollment as the prior year was significantly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, which had a 4.29% reduction in student enrollment. Overall, the 21-22 estimated student enrollment is still short of the 19-20 student enrollment levels of 11,753 students. In normal years, the division has seen relatively consistent overall growth in student enrollment from year to year. This growth is in part due to the growth within the city of Lethbridge. The projected student enrollment for 21-22 and future years is estimated to recover and eventually increase student enrollment, in which the division uses forecasting software, reviews grade movement from year to year, and uses other information to support in the forecasting of student enrollment. Student enrollment is the most significant factor in determining the division's funding, in which the division's funding is determined using a weighted moving average. Overall, the division is projecting to receive a total of $132.51 million in operating revenues, whereas this results in a 2.48% reduction in available funding from the prior year. Therefore, looking at the revenue breakdown between the different types of funding, approximately 93% of the revenues are received directly from the province. In reviewing the changes from the prior year, there was an increase in student enrollment from the prior year. The estimated enrollment is also compared to 1920 and 2021 to determine the division's weighted moving average for funding allocations. In the prior year, the division received federal funds of $4.1 million for the Safe Return to Class grant, which was a one-time grant that flowed through the province and was designed to support with the transition back to in-class and online learning as a result of COVID-19. The plant operation and maintenance grants were reduced as the province had reduced both the PO&M enrollment-based and space utilization grant rates. The capital portion of infrastructure maintenance and renewal was also reallocated to the capital fund. There was a reduction in the projected fee revenues from school-generated funds as there is less likely SGF activities that can be completed during the school year as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the division will receive an additional $3.1 million in COVID mitigation funding for the 21-22 school year. The division has initially estimated $2.64 million in use of one-time reserves to support in instructional programming, projected carry-forward funding from 2021, and plant operation and maintenance reserves to support with the grant rate reductions. The 21-22 reserves may also be updated in the fall budget update. Therefore, with the total of $132.51 million in available funding, the division can allocate these funds to the applicable programs. So to review the funding allocations, we can look at a comparison of the funding sources from the prior year to support with this year's program allocations. Overall, the division received a decrease of $3.35 million in operating revenues from the prior year's operating budget. Whereas within this decrease, a large portion specifically relates to the decrease in the infrastructure, maintenance, and renewal grants, as the capital portion was removed and reallocated to the capital fund by the province, accounting for a $1.8 million decrease. There was also an approximate $450,000 decrease in the plant operation and maintenance funding, as there was the grant rate reductions in this area. In addition to the changes in the provincial funding, there was also a $1.4 million reduction in the school-generated funds fee revenues, as there will likely be a reduction to the school-generated fund activities, such as travel and other options, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. This resulted in an overall reduction of $3.37 million in available funding from the prior year. The allocations to programs is a direct result of the changes in the funding sources, including a reduction to the instructional allocations of 1.36%, mostly from the reduction in the SGF revenues and related costs, as these are offset. A reduction to the plant operation and maintenance allocation only had a decrease of 0.6%, as reserves were able to be utilized to mitigate the grant rate reductions this year, as there are specific cost increases such as insurance that still must be managed. And capital and debt services are also decreased specifically for the reduction in the IMR revenues and costs for the capital portion that has now been moved to the capital fund. Based on the available funding and allocations, the division is projecting to have expenditures of $132.51 million, balancing the operational budgets. The most significant component to the division's costs is the staffing. As shown in the chart, the division typically has had growth from year to year. However, in 2021, there was a significant drop in enrollment to 11,249 students as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Although there was a significant drop in enrollment, the division was able to maintain the staffing levels as the division was able to utilize reserves and other savings to hold the schools harmless in 2021. Note that the reduction in support staffing in 2021 was not a result of the reduced enrollment. Instead, it was part of the changes in the prior year's provincial funding framework to the PUF program and other related changes. According to last year's survey, the division was considered the third largest employer within the city of Lethbridge, whereas the division spends 56% of its total budget on teaching staff and 21% on support staffing. The division is projecting an increase of 6.3 FTE in teaching staffing, accounting for a 1% increase. This includes the addition of a principal and vice principal position at the new Dr. Robert Plaxton Elementary School, and as it is a priority to maintain reasonable class sizes, the division has allocated 25.6 FTE of contingent classroom teaching positions to support with addressing potential hotspots and to support with schools that have additional student enrollment growth, in which these positions may be allocated once more information is finalized relating to student enrollment levels. Support staffing is projecting an increase of 8.1 full-time equivalent staffing, accounting for a 1.7% increase. This includes an increase of 5.35 FTE in educational assistants, additional support staffing for the new elementary school, such as additional administrative supports, learning commons facilitators, and caretaking staff. As shown in the chart, of the 5.35 FTE increase in educational assistance, there was a 6.5 FTE increase in the EAs specifically for the kindergarten PUF program, with additional funding being allocated to this program. The other educational assistants are allocated to schools based on actual student needs. The overall factors affecting staffing include increased enrollment and the effects of the weighted moving average, a decrease in the average teaching cost with retirements and new staff being hired, the addition of the new elementary school, and an increase to the average educational assistance costs with grid movements and increased benefit costs. Some additional information relating to staffing. Staffing costs account for 77% of the total operating budget, in which teaching staff specifically relates to 56% of the budget. Within the instructional programs themselves, this distribution is even more allocated towards staffing at 87%. As previously discussed, according to the 2019 survey, the division is the third largest employer within the City of Lethbridge, which is the most recent survey available. And the division has been able to reduce our class sizes over the past couple of years, as this has been a priority for the division. However, certain factors outside of the division's control, such as the future removal or reductions to some of our one-time funding of COVID mitigation and bridge funding, could add challenges for future years. Overall, the division expenditures are directly tied to the available funding and program allocations, whereas 82% of the division's budget is for instructional programs and a total of 18% is for non-instructional programs, including plant operation and maintenance, capital, administration, and transportation. The instructional program is the largest area of the budget, representing 82% of the entire operating budget. Within the instructional programs, the vast majority of the costs relate directly to staffing. Therefore, changes in the funding have staffing implications. As you can see within the different instructional groups, there are initial decreases within the specific elementary, middle, and high schools. However, these will be increased once the 25.6 FTE of contingent staffing is allocated throughout the schools. The instructional program utilizes an instructional budget committee to allocate funding within the instructional programs and includes representatives from elementary, middle, and high school. Overall, this committee reviewed the challenges with the uncertainty of student enrollment and ensured that the division is properly planning in advance for the potential fluctuations and changes in enrollment, both at the school level and in total for the division. The allocation of contingent staffing to support with addressing potential hotspots and to support schools that have additional student enrollment growth support with this uncertainty. Overall, the elementary group is projecting a 194 student increase from the prior year. However, as 2021 had lost 437 students in this group as a result of COVID-19 pandemic. This is still a 243 student decrease from 1920 enrollment levels. With the addition of the new elementary school, there was additional staffing added. However, this resulted in an overall net decrease of 1.5 FTE in teaching staffing. Middle schools are projecting a 58 student increase from the prior year. However, in 2021, they had lost 56 students, therefore coming effectively back to the 1920 enrollment levels. Between the middle schools, there is still some significant fluctuations in staffing on a school-by-school basis. Therefore, middle schools have lost 1.95 FTE decrease based on certain schools having reduced enrollment. High schools are projecting 67 student increase from the prior year. However, as 2021 had only lost 17 students, they're expecting an overall increase from the 1920 enrollment and are estimating to have a 0.82 FTE increase in teaching staffing. Overall, schools had a reduction in their supplies from the prior year as many of the schools had used one-time carry forward funding for specific purchases of supplies, equipment, and technology in the prior year. Actual carry forward funding will be allocated in the fall budget update. Within the other instructional programs, there was an overall increase in inclusive learning as there was an increase in the total educational assistance as a result of the increase in the funding allocations for the kindergarten PUP program and additional Making Connection staff with the approval of an additional grant. These increases were only partially decreased by reductions in the consulting services for occupational therapists. The technology program had an increase in funding allocation towards the technology evergreening program as the division had added portable devices such as laptops and iPads into this program. There was also an additional technology support added to the division with the new school and to support in other capacity areas. The other instructional programs had a net increase with the contingent teaching staff that has been allocated to address hotspots and enrollment growth. Although the division added these 25.6 FTE of contingent staffing, the prior year had included related staffing and costs within the Safe Return to Class grant, which was a one-time grant that was provided in the prior year. Therefore, the increase in this year was partially offset by the reductions in this federal grant funding. Other instructional also includes the school generated fund activity costs. Therefore, the decreases in the related fee revenues also had the relating decreases in the SGF activity costs. Administration covers many of the legislative and operational requirements of the division and includes the costs of the Board of Trustees, the Office of the Superintendent, Business and Finance, Human Resources, and System Instructional Supports. The division received exactly the same level of funding from the province as it did in the prior year. Within administration, there were cost increases within contracted services for the increases in the cost of insurance premiums, whereas savings on supplies and utilities supported with these increases. As shown in the chart, staffing is a large component within this program. Overall, the division uses 3.09% of the budget towards administration, whereas this is lower than the historical cap of 3.6% and the most recent provincial average of 3.53%. Plant operation maintenance covers the division's responsibility for the construction, operation, maintenance, safety, and security of all buildings and includes the costs of maintenance, caretaking, and capital-related costs for the division. Overall, with the decrease in the PO&M grant rates, plant operation maintenance resulted in a $280,000 decrease in funding. However, plant operation maintenance reserves were utilized to mitigate the rate reductions this year as there are specific costs such as insurance that must be managed. Between plant operation and maintenance and capital, it accounts for 13% of the total budget. There was a 1 FTE increase in caretaking staff added to the department to support with the new elementary school. There were decreases in building maintenance and other services which supported in the increased costs of the building insurance premiums. And the division was able to save on some utility costs as a result of replacing and upgrading of related infrastructure. Within the capital and debt services, the decrease specifically relates to the decrease in infrastructure maintenance and renewal funding as the capital portion was removed and reallocated to the capital fund. transportation includes all activities of transporting students to, from, and between schools. It is provided for students that live over 2.4 kilometers walking distance from their designated schools. There was a $40,000 increase in available funding as the division has started providing the coordination of transportation services for another school division as well, so that both divisions may maximize efficiencies with the combined services and routes. This supported with some additional staffing and service costs as well. The transportation department accounts for 2% of the total budget and transports over 3,600 students every day. Therefore, with the total of $132.51 million in expenditures, the division can show its breakdown into the 5 major programs. As shown before, instruction accounts for 82% of the total budget. Support services account for 18% of the total budget, in which the majority relates to the plant operation, maintenance, and capital. This information on the percentages of each department is shown in the following chart, and the expenditures are displayed by type, whereas the majority are relating to staffing costs. As part of our budget process, we are looking for the public feedback on the budget. We have a quick online form that includes some ratings on the budget and additional comment areas if you'd like to provide more detailed feedback. This form will be available through a QR code on the budget boards, and a link will be provided on the website. Please note that our website in our financial reporting section includes a lot of additional information, such as an executive summary and large budget boards that also go through the budget in more detail. This feedback survey will be available until Friday, May 21st, and the results will be provided to the board for their review as part of our board budget debate, which is at 1 p.m. on Tuesday, May 25th, 2021. Thank you for your interest in Lethbridge School Division's 21-22 preliminary operating budget. We look forward to the feedback on the budget and the related allocations.